early stages of patients coming through at a point where they're gasping for breath. I see them mostly already intubated. The ICUs are full, and they're going to stay full for weeks, maybe months, because it takes people such a long time to recover their ability to breathe on their own. And it gets a little discouraging feeling you want to see patients make progress. It just feels better for your heart. We're trying to be there for the patients too, and just like take a minute to hold their hand, and even if they can't interact with us, to talk to them and let them know that there are people here and caring for them. But it's heartbreaking to not be able to have families come in and to have patients this sick and dying alone without that comfort of the people who love them surrounding them. And we're all scared too, because we've seen just how bad the disease can be. But it's also nice to see the people who've recovered and hear them say, yeah, it's worse than a normal cold, and it's an unpleasant disease, but there are people who do okay for it. Being here for me gives me a little bit of a sense of peace about my role, but the people who have had this disease sort of sweep into their lives, whether it's the patients or the healthcare workers, or the people who are cleaning the hospitals, or the people at the grocery stores who have had to drastically change the way they work. So many people out there still being truly brave and getting it done when everything is completely out of their control. And it's the sort of reaction of New Yorkers and I think this country as a whole.
And Laura Withers is a Maine surgeon and critical care doctor currently working at Long Island Jewish Hospital in New York. Liz Ryder Arnold produced this story. If you have a story to share about your life during the pandemic, write to us at tellmemore@mainepublic.org and let us know the best way to reach you. This is Maine Public Radio. I'm Laura Flaherty. On This Day in Maine's History is brought to you in partnership with the Maine Historical Society.
Shipwright Harvey Gamage was born in South Bristol on April 17, 1898. Gamage was perhaps the most well-known shipbuilder in South Bristol's history. In 1924, he left a shipbuilding apprenticeship in East Booth Bay to start his own shipyard in South Bristol. From 1924 to 1976, Gamage oversaw the construction of nearly every class of wooden ship, from sailboats to powerboats to yachts to military ships. Most of his early boats were sloops and schooners designed by the well-known naval architect John Alden.
On This Day in Maine's History is made possible through the generous support of Roosevelt Campobello International Park and the Island Institute. Happy birthday, Maine.
All Things Considered is made possible by your support and by Natural Resources Council of Maine, protecting the nature of Maine across the generations for over 60 years. NRCM.org. And by Crossroads, gender-responsive addiction treatment for women during these challenging times, including virtual counseling. CrossroadsME.org.
And you're listening to All Things Considered. Ahead on the program, what happens when millions of Americans don't pay the rent? Landlords don't get paid and they pass on that debt to someone else. We will follow the chain to the top. This is All Things Considered. Let's check in now on the weather, shall we? Tonight, skies clearing in the south with lows in the 20s. Tomorrow, mostly cloudy in the north, partly sunny in the rest of the state with some light snow in the far south at night. Windy tomorrow with highs in the 40s. Saturday, partly sunny, highs in the 40s and 50s. And Sunday, partly to mostly cloudy with highs in the high 40s up to the high 50s, so a little bit of a milder day. This is Maine Public Radio. It's 10 minutes before 6.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Elsa Chang. Streets are noticeably quiet now with stay-at-home orders in place. Gone are the rattling trucks, the smell of exhaust, and the gridlock. And in their place are joggers, cyclists, and dog walkers, many of them wearing masks, all looking to stay active during the lockdown. And some cities are taking advantage of this moment to rethink how people can use the roads. Alex Davies wrote about this for Wired, and he joins us now. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with you live in Berkeley, California, and I understand that they have disabled the buttons that pedestrians press to cross the street. Why did they do that?
They did that for a basic public health reason. These are the little metal buttons that you push when, as a pedestrian, you want to get a walk signal the next time the light turns red, which otherwise you wouldn't automatically get. And the idea is that, if we can get everybody to be pushing one less thing in public that's a shared metal surface that could be holding pathogens and spreading the coronavirus, then better to disable those.
That sounds pretty reasonable. Okay, and other cities are taking even bigger steps. They're closing streets to cars and just turning them into pedestrian zones. Tell us what you're seeing.
So, a bunch of cities have done this because what's happened essentially is that the demand for street space, the demand among people to get outside, hasn't really gone down, but the demand from cars has disappeared largely. So what you have instead is people trapped inside who either need to walk to work now or need to walk to their public transit station, or who just want to be outside for a jog or walk their dog or a breath of fresh air. Mm-hmm. And because now all of a sudden every person needs 6 feet of space around them, which is roughly the space your average passenger car needs, then some cities have moved to actually shut down streets in certain areas and say, we're going to close traffic off to these streets, no more vehicles driving here, and that way people just have that room that in normal times is dedicated to vehicles can now be used by pedestrians or people biking.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people also, they rely on trains and buses to get to work, and with public transit now operating on way more limited schedules, you write that some cities are making it easier for people to bike. So how are they doing that exactly?
So Bogota, for example, Colombia has been really progressive here. They've already got a pretty robust cycling infrastructure. But what they've done on some major streets is, because car traffic there is now so far down from its normal levels, they've been able to take a whole lane out of those streets, and they just lined it up with traffic cones, and they said, this is now a temporary bike lane. Berlin has accelerated plans that were already in the works to ramp up its bike network. Budapest has put in temporary bike lanes. And the idea here is that it's important for these networks to become more robust, because the people who need to get outside are not only the people who want to go outside for a walk, a breath of fresh air, keep their sanity intact. People still need to move around in this time. And cycling is an important way to do that, especially when public transit levels are greatly cut back.
Alex Davies is the transportation editor at Wired. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks.
This month, 1/3 of renters in America did not pay their landlord on time, according to the National Multifamily Housing Council. So what happens when millions of Americans suddenly can't afford the rent? Mary Childs is co-host of our Planet Money podcast, and she follows the money from tenant to landlord to a multi-trillion-dollar international market.
Emily Gordon is a server at a Mexican restaurant in Philadelphia. Or she was until last month when she got laid off. And a couple weeks later, her rent was due. $750, which would be half of her savings.
I had about $1,500 saved. It would be half, yeah.
Philly, like a ton of other cities, has introduced a moratorium on evictions. But Emily decided it was fair to pay half rent.
I did, want to pay something because it's like a domino effect.
She knows everyone has their bills to pay, including her landlord, Ed Edge.
I've got a lot of people paying nothing.
He owns 4 small buildings with a total of 14 tenants. Normally, Edge says he collects a bit over $9,000 per month. When we talked to him on April 2nd, he had gotten just $1,500. That is way less than his own monthly bills, the mortgages on his buildings. Now, he does have a temporary lifeline. In that big rescue bill Congress passed last month, there's a part about people not having to pay mortgages for up to 6 months. But that just delays when he owes it. It doesn't forgive it. And the missing rent from his tenants? That's likely gone forever.
They're not ever going to be able to make enough money when they start working again to pay back rent, like to pay the rents that they weren't able to pay beforehand.
In America, companies that collect mortgages from people like Edge usually don't actually own the mortgages. These mortgage servicers, as they're called, are actually also stressed because even though Edge can delay payments a few months, they still have to pass the money on like normal to the last stop on the chain, mortgage investors. They're the ones who are really owed the money, and indirectly, they may be you or me. Lots of people with a pension or a retirement account with a bond fund. Many bond funds buy mortgages, as do hundreds of hedge funds and life insurers around the world.
And that is the crazy hidden architecture of homeownership in America. And it is breaking right now.
Chris Odenay is a law professor at the University of Oklahoma, and he wrote a book on mortgages.
How can we expect these firms, these servicers, who in fact right now are financially weak, to make significant payments to investors when they themselves have no money coming in the door? When you pull the curtain back and you see how this actually works, most people say this doesn't really make any sense.
There is one last really important fact about the U.S. mortgage market. Most of those mortgage bundles, the ones in our retirement accounts, are backed by the United States government, even in non-pandemic times. And the reason is basically to enable Americans to get cheap mortgages. It's how we can get a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage that we can refinance whenever we want. That is not really a product of a free market. And this government backing means that if the mortgage servicers can't pay mortgage investors, the U.S. government is ultimately on the hook to step in and make those payments. If renters can't pay the rent, and their landlords can't pay the mortgage, and the servicers can't pay the investors, then at some point, the government will pay. Mary Childs, NPR News.